All right, we're live, coffee and chat with Rev Bruce, and I'm doing this to get into just a little bit about what I'm doing for National Poetry Month, as well as in launching street ministry through Life Path Mobile Ministries. And just so you know, Coffee and Chat is part of Life Path Multimedia Ministries, but what we're doing on the streets, what we're doing with faith, going out and trying to touch and impact people, specifically those who are sheep without shepherds, is Life Path Mobile Ministries. So there's Life Path Multimedia Ministries and there's Life Path Mobile Ministries. Think of it like this: Life Path Multimedia is online, and Life Path Mobile Ministries is what's out and about. All right, and so I labeled this poetry poetry against poverty, because you'll see with part of our campaign that we'll be doing from now through the end of, or the middle of June, June 19th, from now until June 10th, we'll be having a download or donate campaign. And so, just so you know, I did a segment on part of what I'm going to cover today. That was, Jesus, that was 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, when I did this piece on when I originally set up to do the relaunch. The relaunch. And the was relaunch was a double volume of poetry that I put together based upon some past work that I had previously published and made it into an ebook exclusive. And so this was a prior video that I did live stream explaining part of the journey of getting that published and shared. And so definitely check that out. I'll put that in the comments just so you could see. And as we go into today, I want you to see kind of not just what the poetry includes, but also how I structured some of the poetry in order to speak to some of the social issues. I tend to call some of my work poetry and protest, as well as just poetic social commentary. And when we look at it, you'll see what I'm talking about. And let's get into that right now. So if you notice, this is coming from the relaunch, which you'll see on the left is one of the poems. I'll read it. The critics win. I've had it. I'm through. I am completely done. They've done it. You know who. The critics have won. I vow on this day I will no longer dream. I vow on this day I will give into their scheme. I'm done. I'm out. I've lost my ability to fight. They've won, no doubt, but it just don't seem right. And that's the critics win. I'm basically sick and tired of critical critiques. And you'll see on the right is this mashup of how I structured the table of contents, of how the poetry is laid out. Just, I believe that as a creative writer and someone who has an artistic mind, that you can express things creatively in multiple ways. And so I did that with the table of contents for Free at Last in particular, which is the first volume of the relaunch. And so when you look at the table of contents for Free at Last, you see this structure that's a mashup of different types of text, different types of word structure, to where you see it begin to fall together into different places where you might notice that with the poetry, I also tend to keep varied text as far as fonts, even sizes, so that it has its own identity, as opposed to just a plain volume of text. And so you'll see that throughout some of my work as we go through, and please recognize it. This is a poem, Sympathy Serenade, beside the cover that I did for the relaunch. And let me go into Sympathy Serenade. I believe it was an evergreen, stern and tall. I believe he was 19, not that old at all. He hung lifeless from an evergreen, stern and tall. He was lynched at just 19 for no real reason at all. And this goes back to the historical experience of African Americans, particularly during Jim Crow era of lynching. When we talk about the injustice that many people had to face, dealing with racism, dealing with the structure that was going on during the Jim Crow period, technically following the Reconstruction in the South and going on even until the 50s and 60s. Lynching was a common practice in a lot of areas. And to go into that and look at that reflectively as a student of history, a student of human development and the human condition, sociology, I felt artistically that this was something I could say about it. And so that was Sympathy Serenade. And if you notice, when I constructed the cover for this book, The Relaunch, it has both sides, Free at Last, which is the first volume in the combination of the collection. The first volume of poems is Free at Last, and that's on the left-hand side, which is a filtered image with the Free at Last title. And then on the right side is a more abstract filtered image, which deals with righting the wrongs. And Righting the Wrongs is a separate second collection of poetry that is also included in the relaunch. So the relaunch has 2 volumes of poetry. And take this into consideration. The second book that I just did a eBook release for is Words from the Underground. Words from the Underground. And Words from the Underground takes social commentary from the perspective of a person on the streets. This is something that I wrote and published, I believe, as far back as 2010. And this was before I got into a situation where I was, on the streets for a minute. I was, living in hotels and dealing with the issue of not having a concrete place to stay. And so that was a period where, I was able to reflect on, here it is, this book of poetry I wrote, and then I'm looking back at this book of poetry as part of my own experience now, so it's a trip. And so this book actually takes it from a perspective of a person on the street dealing with schizophrenia, not so much multiple personalities, but the whole idea of multiple voices within his head. And so this book features varied texts, varied structures as far as the poems. Some parts are more narrative, some parts are more, from the first person, some are from a third person view. And so you really get this picture of someone who is going through some form of psychosis. I really took the idea from what you would see in Toni Morrison's Bluest Eye, The Bluest Eye actually shows in its opening pages the eventuality of what the stress and strain of PTSD and trauma can do to us. And so when we talk about the effects of trauma in our lives, particularly those that are struggling with homelessness, those that are struggling with mental illness, that's where I was coming from with words from the underground. And I utilized the underground because when we look at it, here are those who are underrepresented, overlooked, who are passed up, passed on, who are outcasts, in many cases marginalized, not always based upon who they are, but what they're going through and what they're dealing with. And so that's part of why when I say poetry against poverty, that's part of my particular struggle with it, is because we tend to look at it and see the problem and see the person as a problem, not a person who's experiencing problems. And so, like I said, we see the person as a problem when we should see a person experiencing problems. And these are two poems from the collection within Words from the Underground. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's not about multiple excuses, magnified ego, misguided expectations, or manifested emptiness. It's not about me. And so that is a poem that really came from the idea of here we are in this whole world, this whole system of a lot of individuality, a lot of ego involved. We look at the psychology of it. And so when I looked at doing It's Not About Me, I really looked at me as an acronym and what are those different things that make up me and that mindset of me. And so that's why it's not about me. Really, as you can see in the first line, me is all caps, right? Because it's representing that acronym. And then when we get to the final line, me is in a lower text. And with that, you actually see that it's been refined from me being so big to it's really not about me. So I hope you can grasp that and see what's going on and picture this from the perspective of someone with mental illness and take that into account. And then missing motivators. Missing motivators, as you can see, two different texts side by side, all included in the same volume. Missing motivators says, I counted them on my fingers. I counted them one by one. I counted them out loud until my counting was done. I counted them one by one. I counted them until I was done. I counted them and counted on them, but now I find none. And this deals with really going back to being a part of Freedom School, being a part of community work where we dealt with a lot of social action, a lot of work in trying to push not just programming, but policy. Some of the work I did with RCNO and what they were able to do with UAMIC, as well as San Diego Congregations for Change. And so when we talk about a lot of the work that we're doing these days is based upon a framework that was constructed during the civil rights movement. And at some point, a lot of the time we look for that one leader, that MLK, that Malcolm X, that Marcus Garvey, that voice, that person to lead the charge. And at this point, I just really didn't see anyone standing out as any one of those motivators. We really have to focus on people power and what are we going to do together as a unified front in order to bring about change within our own local communities. And so that's coming from my perspective as far as those missing motivators, those that we always tend to seek out, but not necessarily find. And so that was part of that poetry from both Words from the Underground and The Relaunch. And it's another project I started working on in 2021, and I'm still working on as part of my post-pandemic poetry. Creativity died and left me empty. I was left blind to where I could not see. Now I'm born again for all to see just how much God poured into me. A rebirth of fire within my voice, a rebirth of which I had no choice. Born again, and now I see, born again and set totally free. That's the rebirth. And so that, once again, this project, the rebirth, is actually going to be truly a visual based project. And so you can see from the imagery that I put with the poetry, there's going to be more visual, poetic content within the rebirth. And so please stay in tune, stay connected, and check out what we're doing with the rebirth coming up. And so this is our download or donate campaign. So it's going from today all the way through June 19th, right? It's going from today all the way to June 19th. And we have the GoFundMe campaign, which is part of what I'm doing with LifePath Mobile Ministries. As I mentioned before, that's the GoFundMe campaign. And that's with LifePath Mobile Ministries. And that is part of getting into where we're dealing with what I consider to be standing in the gap. And what I mean by standing in the gap, we are addressing three primary issues, which are health, hunger, and I mentioned before, homelessness. So health, hunger, and homelessness. Health, hunger, and homelessness. And within that, our main thing is about, not just feeding people, but getting to the root cause and fighting poverty, right? And so if we can really see that part of what we're doing is not the systematic putting band-aids on the symptoms, but kind of uprooting some of the root causes of what we're seeing on the surface. And what I mean by that is hunger is an issue. Some of these health disparities are issues. Homelessness is an issue. But all those tend to be related to poverty, low income, not having a livable wage, being underemployed, being unemployed, not having education foundation that you can base some of your career path and things of that nature on. So that's what I'm talking about with getting to the root cause of it. How are we addressing that? And so this whole idea of utilizing the poetry to get there, as well as utilizing some of the work that we're doing through Life Path Ministries, is part of it. And so you'll also see here the relaunch, right? I put that there as far as the relaunch and where it is online, where you can get the relaunch. You can also scan the QR codes. The relaunch is available online. I priced both books, the relaunch and Words from the Underground. I priced both books at $5.99. Try to keep it still affordable, right? I don't believe in creating a $20 eBook, right? It's different if you're getting something in print, and that's going to be printed and shipped or anything like that. So definitely look at that. But this download or donate campaign is really looking at putting, the profits, proceeds, going towards Life Path Mobile Ministries, for, serving and supporting those that are getting the stuff, the help that they need, right? I've been researching and I've been looking at it, and I'm really disgusted, man. I'm really disgusted by what's happening and what's not happening for individuals who are experiencing homelessness, individuals who are dealing with food insecurity, individuals who are disabled, suffering from mental illness, who have just had a traumatic experience that has set them on a pathway for a downward spiral. And as I mentioned before, there's no one there standing in the gap. There's no one there, holding anyone else's feet to the fire except for saying, you know what, these people are an eyesore. These people are, someone needs to do something about this. Well, who is someone that needs to do something about this other than you? Who is someone who needs to do something about this other than you with a heart to do something about it? And so I really was inspired by Systems Online. I give her a lot of credit. They're on Twitter, and you can see them. It's really one of my go-tos that I really appreciate them being informative, them seeking input. But it's really, housing for the homeless, and Amy and what she's doing. I really appreciate what they do and how they do it here in San Diego, focusing on patient dumping. I'm trying to organize some men and young adults to go support these senior women who are going out in the middle of the night and supporting these patients who are being dumped by hospitals at the bus stop, out the back door of the hospital, even at the homeless resource center that's closed at that time. And so we really gotta think about it. Where do we fit into the overall big picture? Where do we fit into this whole thing? And so that's why I'm doing this campaign to download or donate, April 1st through June 19th. That'll take us to the Juneteenth celebration. And I really want to make sure that we're cognizant of the different ways that we can use what we have. I use my creative talent of poetry in recognition of National Poetry Month in order to do this. And I really hope that this is something that you can see as sincere and genuine in an effort to help others. My goal is to impact lives, impact others through the work that I do, through the writing that I do. Hopefully, as I said before, I'm in the inspiration business. And so that's part of what I want to do. But I'm also in the business that should lead to impacting someone. And that's where I'm coming from. And that's as genuine as I can be. And so these are my latest ebook poetry projects that I have out that are available at an affordable price, $5.99 each. get it, download it, or donate to the GoFundMe campaign. But this is just an effort to show that you can use what you have in order to make a difference, in order to launch something, in order to ignite others, inspire others. And if nothing else, I hope that by me simply sharing this, that someone else is made aware of the effects of mental illness, trauma, and just overall poverty on the lives of individuals within this nation, within this world, as well as within your local communities. You know what? This has been Coffee and Chat with Rev Bruce. I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you being here. Please, please consider downloading or donating during this time, April 1st through June 19th. And in the meantime, be good to yourself and God bless.